I saw a man pointing a gun at my wife, right there in our front yard in broad daylight. My heart nearly stopped. My wife, Dana, had just come back from an early morning jog, wearing simple running shoes and a light jacket. The stranger holding the pistol stood a few feet away, hand shaking like he wasn't sure what he was doing. His vest had some kind of fake security badge on it, but that didn't matter. He had a weapon aimed at the person I love most in this world. We moved to Cypress Grove hoping for a peaceful neighborhood, full of friendly neighbors and quiet streets. Dana had served in the military for years, serious, high-level missions, so this place was supposed to be her chance to relax, plant a garden, and go for carefree runs at sunrise. But now, we were face to face with a self-styled HOA patrol officer who thought he had the right to stop anyone he found suspicious. He barked something about showing ID before entering restricted property, which was strange because, last I checked, the sidewalk in front of our home belonged to everyone. Dana could have taken the gun away in seconds. She was fully trained for that. But she tried to speak calmly, giving the man a chance to lower his weapon. He refused. That's when, in the blink of an eye, she knocked it from his grip and pinned him to the ground. It was both terrifying and unreal, like we'd stumbled into a bad movie. Only this was our real life, and it was about to get much more complicated. But before we dive further into this strange tale, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Feel free to drop your city or town in the comments. It's always interesting to see how these stories connect people across different places. And if the idea of an HOA showdown sounds fascinating to you, you're welcome to hit that like button or even subscribe. No pressure, just a friendly invite to stay tuned if you're curious about what happens next. Alright, let's keep going. Dana and I first discovered Cypress Grove when we searched for a normal, calm place to settle down. She had spent years doing serious military work in places she couldn't talk about. After all that stress, she wanted a simple life, morning runs, maybe a backyard garden, and some pleasant neighbors who said hello but didn't pry. I'm Mitch, a cybersecurity consultant who can work from home. All I wanted was good Wi-Fi, a comfy desk, and a coffee pot that never ran dry. The online brochure for Cypress Grove promised a beautiful community with tree-lined streets, neat houses, and a focused HOA that handled small issues like lawn care and community events. Dana and I thought it sounded perfect, like the exact opposite of the chaos she had known during her tours abroad. Little did we realize that sometimes chaos follows you, even when you move to a quiet cul-de-sac. While we were unloading boxes, a woman in a crisp outfit walked up, 3 clipboards in her arms, a big smile on her face. "Hi, I'm Karen, president of the Cypress Grove Homeowners Association," she announced, handing us a thick rulebook. At first, I just thought, wow, this HOA takes itself seriously. But Dana, who reads body language better than anyone, later told me Karen had the confident look of someone who always gets her way. Karen explained some community guidelines, like how often we had to mow our lawn, what kinds of fences were allowed, and even which colors were okay for our mailbox. Dana politely thanked her, but I noticed Dana's raised eyebrows when she flipped through the long list of do's and don'ts. Karen ended with, "I'm available day or night if you have questions," then walked off with a cheerful wave. It all seemed harmless at first. Within a week, we started seeing unmarked golf carts cruising around the neighborhood in the early evening. They had plastic lights strapped on top and labels like Community Safety Squad. A few times, I spotted these officers peeking into yards, making notes on clipboards. One neighbor whispered that they'd been fined because their car tires touched the curb in the wrong angle. Another got cited for wind chimes that disrupted the peace. It sounded ridiculous, but I figured maybe the HOA just had overzealous members. Dana said little about it, focusing instead on her new greenhouse project. She'd come from places where real danger lurked around every corner, so a bunch of adults riding golf carts didn't feel threatening to her. But her instincts must have sensed something was off. She would sometimes watch them out the window, just a slight frown on her face, as if she was picking up on tension beneath the surface. One morning, about a week after we moved in, Dana went for a jog. She liked to head out at sunrise when it was cool. I was sipping coffee, checking my emails, when my phone alert showed a camera event near our front yard. I looked at the live feed and saw 2 men in black shirts, each with a homemade HOA security patch, blocking Dana's path. One had a pistol in his hand, aimed at her torso. I ran outside as fast as I could. By the time I got there, the man was hollering about no unauthorized joggers. Dana was calmly standing still, hands slightly raised in a gesture of peace. The guy's face was red and his arm twitched like he was scared. I yelled, "Put the gun down." But he kept shouting that he had the right to protect HOA property. In a flash, Dana stepped forward, knocked the weapon out of his hand, and twisted his arm behind his back. He let out a cry, face pressed to the grass. I was relieved Dana was okay, but also stunned that we were dealing with an actual firearm threat in a friendly suburb. Right then, I realized we were in for a whole different kind of trouble. We figured the real police would handle this, and they did show up, took statements, and gave the HOA officer a warning. But they said there wasn't much they could do unless we pressed charges, which might lead nowhere. Then Karen arrived, furious that her security team member had been humiliated. She glared at Dana like we were the aggressors. She mumbled about how this jogger had escalated things. It was wild, no mention of the fact her officer had pointed a gun at a resident. That evening, we got a hand-delivered note accusing Dana of violating community standards and threatening a fine for disruptive behavior. The note said we owed $500 for obstruction of security patrol. Dana laughed out loud when she saw it, but I felt a knot of worry. Clearly, Karen was not a reasonable person. As days went by, we heard more and more stories about arbitrary HOA fines, weird rules, and how Karen and her core group of officers enforced them with intimidation. One woman was told she couldn't have more than 2 potted plants on her porch. Another man was fined for letting his dog pee on the grass near the sidewalk. People seemed scared to fight back, like they believed Karen was unstoppable. Dana decided to dig deeper. She researched the HOA's public filings, looking up financial records and seeing how the money was spent. She found huge payments to a company called Pine Valley Services for maintenance, but there was no sign of actual workers or improvements. Meanwhile, the roads were full of cracks and the landscaping was minimal. It smelled like a slush fund. Dana wasn't a trained accountant, but she was used to investigating complex operations. She knew how to follow a paper trail. Karen called an emergency meeting to address ongoing threats to neighborhood peace. Flyers popped up on mailboxes inviting everyone to the clubhouse. We showed up out of curiosity. The room was packed with neighbors, some looking nervous, others looking fed up. Karen marched up front, flanked by 2 men wearing matching black polo shirts with HOA security on the sleeves. One was the same guy Dana had disarmed. Karen cleared her throat and delivered a dramatic speech about how a certain resident, she never said Dana's name directly, posed a serious risk to the community. She claimed her officer had acted bravely to stop a trespasser. Then she waved some papers, yelling about new rules that would require every jogger to wear a special badge. She ended by saying, "If you break these rules, expect consequences." I raised my hand to ask about the gun. "Why did your officer pull a weapon on someone just running?" Karen tried to dodge the question. Another neighbor stood up and played a short phone video of the incident. It showed the officer shouting at Dana, who stood still and tried to reason with him. This quiet proof silenced the room. People started murmuring. Karen cut the meeting short, claiming she had urgent matters to handle. But we all saw how weak her story was. Karen didn't back down. Instead, she sent more letters. One accused Dana of verbal aggression. Another claimed we owed fees for unapproved yard equipment. We had a simple metal rake leaning against the wall. The total was now over $1,200. Each notice threatened bigger penalties if we didn't pay. It was obvious Karen was trying to scare us off or wear us down. Meanwhile, some neighbors approached us in private, relieved someone was pushing back. They shared stories of unstoppable fines, late-night visits from golf cart patrols that scanned their windows with flashlights, or weird tickets for unfriendly behavior. It felt like a cartoonish form of power, but it was real enough to intimidate normal folks who just wanted a quiet life. Dana stepped up her investigation. She saved every letter, cross-checked dates of maintenance projects, and discovered more phantom companies supposedly being paid for services nobody saw. I helped by running some internet checks. Sure enough, these businesses had little to no public presence. They seemed to exist only in HOA paperwork. A neighbor named Craig, who worked in local government, said quietly, "I bet Karen is running some kind of embezzlement scheme." We considered complaining to the city, but since Cypress Grove was partly private land, the city might not have direct control. We decided to reach out to someone Dana knew from her military work, a contact who had ties to a federal auditing office. That person said, "Send me what you have. We'll see if it falls under any federal guidelines." So we did. Karen tried to hold another big meeting, this time praising the security patrol for keeping the peace. She set up a projector, apparently planning to show evidence that residents who questioned her leadership were troublemakers. But before she got 2 slides in, half a dozen neighbors stood up, demanding to talk about the gun incident, the endless fines, and the suspicious finances. Tension filled the room. Someone showed more phone footage of her security people pulling over random drivers in the neighborhood, asking them for vehicle papers. Another clip revealed them searching through a person's trash can, claiming they were looking for banned items. The crowd gasped. Karen shouted for order, but it was too late. Her iron grip on the neighborhood was slipping. After enough complaints poured in, the local city council scheduled a hearing about the unusual actions of the Cypress Grove HOA. Usually, HOAs keep their problems private, but Karen's behavior had spilled into bigger territory. The city council hall was packed. Karen arrived with a binder full of printed screenshots and weird documents. Dana showed up with an organized folder of real evidence, plus statements from neighbors who felt harassed. Karen spoke first, saying that she was simply upholding community standards against a wave of criminal-like residents. She insisted Cypress Grove was private land and the city had no power over it. The council members looked skeptical. Then Dana went up and calmly described how the security patrol had pointed a gun at her, how Karen flooded us with random fines, and how a quick look at financial records suggested misuse of funds. Neighbors applauded. Karen glared. The council said they would take the matter under review and advised Karen to hand over any requested documents. Instead of cooling off, Karen sent letters claiming she would sue us for defamation. She posted a randy video on a local social media group, calling Dana a trained agitator. She threatened to increase our fines if we didn't drop all complaints. But all this did was make more neighbors question her authority. People started talking openly about her shady practices. They swapped stories about how she used fear to collect money. Dana and I carried on, ignoring her new wave of threats. Secretly, we shared more data with the federal contact. Soon, an official inquiry was launched, and it arrived on Karen's desk. She tried to lock the HOA clubhouse, forbidding any non-approved individuals from entering. But the letter from the feds wasn't something she could just ignore. Even after the city council hearing, a few loyal officers continued their ridiculous patrols. They drove their golf carts around, stopping random people to demand community ID. One day, Dana was simply walking back from the grocery store when an officer sped up, telling her she couldn't bring outsider goods past the clubhouse. Dana calmly sidestepped his cart, but he tried to chase her around the corner and ended up crashing into a low hedge. It was both sad and comical. Word spread that the HOA's security was completely out of control. More folks shared videos online. A local news channel picked up the story. They ran a piece titled "When HOAs Go Too Far," featuring short clips of Karen's team harassing residents. Karen must have hated that. It made her look like a neighborhood dictator. Meanwhile, the federal inquiry made real progress. Officials requested copies of every bank statement, every contract, and every major expense. People in our neighborhood noticed men in suits coming to the clubhouse, leaving with thick folders. Karen stopped appearing in public for a while, maybe thinking she could hide until it blew over. But soon, we heard that major transactions linked to her personal bank account had been found among HOA records. This was the smoking gun. It proved that huge chunks of money marked for community improvements were going into Karen's pockets. Or untraceable businesses. Rumors spread fast she might face fraud charges, or even worse. The once powerful HOA president was now at serious risk of legal trouble. With Karen's empire crumbling, many neighbors found their courage. They refused to pay more fines, challenged every strange letter they got, and even threatened to band together in a class action lawsuit if Karen tried to press new charges. One older resident named Mrs. Potts, who had been fined repeatedly for excess window decorations, marched up to the clubhouse, pinned all her violation letters on the door, and wrote, "I will not pay." Others followed suit. It was like a mini revolution. When the next HOA board meeting was held, without Karen, who stayed away, people talked about redoing the entire structure of how fees and rules were managed. The vibe was suddenly cooperative, not fearful. Folks traded snacks, suggested real improvements for the neighborhood, and seemed eager to erase the memory of Karen's reign. Karen, feeling cornered, decided to file a lawsuit against Dana and me. Her paperwork was messy and full of bizarre claims about us stealing HOA secrets and endangering community morale. We had a friend who was a lawyer look it over, and he said it was utter nonsense. The case went to a local court, where a tired-looking judge let Karen speak first. She ranted about how she was the true leader of Cypress Grove, that Dana was a dangerous figure with secret training who turned everyone against her, and so on. Our lawyer calmly laid out the facts: the gun incident, the false fines, the suspicious money trail. We also had statements from neighbors. The judge asked Karen for any concrete proof. She showed random pictures of Dana jogging, plus typed notes that made no sense. In the end, the judge dismissed her case and warned Karen she was close to abusing the court system. That felt like a final blow to her crusade. Shortly after the court appearance, a few federal agents arrived in unmarked cars and politely requested to see Karen's financial documents. Neighbors watched from behind curtains as they went in and out of the clubhouse, each time carrying piles of folders. One agent told a curious passerby they were verifying certain records. Karen was nowhere to be found. People guessed she was hiding at a friend's house, hoping to dodge them. A few days later, someone saw her escorted out of the clubhouse by these agents. She didn't appear to be cuffed, but she looked pale and rattled. Whispers flew around that she might face charges. Local gossip websites started running headlines like, "HOA president under federal scrutiny." It was surreal to think how quickly she'd gone from smug queen of the neighborhood to a cornered individual who might face serious legal consequences. With Karen basically out of the picture, the harsh rules she created began to lose force. Nobody bothered to enforce those odd fines about how many flower pots you could have or whether your porch light was the correct wattage. The golf carts disappeared from the roads. A temporary HOA committee formed, led by a retired teacher named Belinda, who believed in fairness and open votes. People started proposing ways to actually fix broken sidewalks and add better lighting, instead of chasing after folks for minor infractions. Dana and I walked around the neighborhood and saw kids playing basketball in driveways, families grilling in their yards, and older couples strolling with dogs. The whole place felt lighter, like everyone could breathe again. A few neighbors even apologized for not speaking up sooner. They said they were afraid of Karen's fines or personal revenge. Dana smiled gently and said, "It's over now. We can just move forward." Dana never wanted fame for outsmarting a tyrannical HOA. But some neighbors acted like she was a local hero. They brought us casseroles, made jokes about awarding her a golden jogger's badge. One even crocheted a goofy doormat that read, "No fines allowed." Dana appreciated the kindness but said little about it. She was just happy that she could jog in peace, no pistol-waving officer to worry about. When I asked her how she felt about toppling Karen's little empire, she shrugged. "I've seen bigger bullies," she said. At least here, people spoke up once they realized they could. She sometimes gazed at the sky in the evenings, the same way she had when she came back from deployment, as if she was finally letting go of tension she'd carried for too long. A few months after the dust settled, we heard Karen might have left Cypress Grove for good. Some rumors said she moved out of state. Others claimed she was under house arrest. We didn't know for sure, but one thing was certain: the HOA wanted nothing to do with her anymore. A formal vote removed her as president, and new rules were put in place so no single person could ever again seize that much power. Federal investigators were still looking at the accounting mess she left behind. People wondered if she'd go to court for fraud or something similar. But as far as daily life in Cypress Grove went, she was a ghost. The fences and cameras she wanted installed were never built. The security patrol vanished. All that remained was a memory of how quickly power can corrupt even a simple suburb. Neighbors rallied around each other in a way they never had before. They planned block parties where people chatted, laughed, and shared food. Kids drew sidewalk chalk art without fear of a fine for defacing common space. The new HOA committee made sure every rule was clear, voted on, and fair. If someone had an issue, they brought it to the group. No more hush-hush fines or weird intimidation tactics. Dana planted more flowers in our front yard, even though the old HOA rules limited the number of plant pots. We put a bench by the sidewalk where folks could sit and chat. Sometimes I'd see someone enjoying the shade, resting after a walk, and it felt good to know the neighborhood was finally free from pointless rules. Whenever I remembered that first morning, seeing a gun pointed at Dana, I felt a mix of anger and relief. Anger that it ever happened, relief that it ended without tragedy. Dana had faced actual war zones, so it was absurd that the biggest threat to her safety turned out to be a misguided neighbor in a phony security vest. But bullies can appear anywhere, even behind white picket fences. Dana said once that the method she used on that man was a basic disarm she'd taught to new recruits. She never thought she'd use it in a quiet American suburb. Yet that's how life can surprise you. One moment, you think you've found peace, and the next, you're dealing with a mini dictator who thinks an HOA badge makes them a general. A year passed, and the neighborhood felt genuinely kind. People waved hello without checking if Karen's patrol was watching. Kids set up lemonade stands without permits or random inspections. Dana still jogged early in the morning, and she'd come back smiling instead of tense. I sometimes joined her, though I couldn't keep her pace for long. We heard through the grapevine that the city council looked into writing clearer rules on what an HOA could and couldn't do. Maybe our story sparked wider change. Neighbors in other communities started paying attention to their own associations, making sure no single person took over. If anything, Karen's downfall became a lesson in how a neighborhood can unite when pushed too far. On a Sunday afternoon, the new HOA board held a casual meet and greet. They offered donuts, coffee, and a friendly Q&A about upcoming community improvements. Nobody stood guard with a weapon, nobody threatened fines. Dana and I lingered, chatting with neighbors, feeling good about how far Cypress Grove had come. Later, as we sat on our porch sipping iced tea, I looked at Dana and asked, "Do you miss the thrill of your old missions?" She smiled softly and said, "This was enough excitement for a lifetime, trust me." Then we turned our attention to the quiet street, where a few kids rode bikes freely. It was calm, it was normal, and it was exactly what we had wanted all along. Thank you so much for following this rollercoaster tale of a neighborhood gone out of control and the determined folks who put things right. If you enjoyed this story of Karen's downfall, feel free to leave a "We stand with the jogger" in the comments. And if you want to stick around for more true life tales where everyday people stand up for what's right, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. May your own neighborhood be calm, friendly, and free of overzealous patrols.